Orangutans fishing with sticks. Gorillas measuring the depth of a river they want to cross with branches. Macaques breaking open mussels with carefully chosen rocks. Chimpanzees hunting termites with slender twigs. These are just a few of the countless examples of non-human primates using tools. But primatologists are now focusing on an even more extraordinary possibility. Monkeys may have entered the Stone Age. At least some monkeys, like chimpanzees and capuchins, are using stone tools, much like humans did about 3 million years ago. Moreover, it seems these monkeys may have entered the Stone Age not just recently, but centuries, or even millennia, ago. What does this mean? Is Planet of the Apes becoming reality? Until the 1960s, when Jane Goodall began closely observing chimpanzees, we believed tool-making was a behavior unique to humans. In fact, because of this, early 20th century anthropologists defined humans as tool-making animals. But it turns out this ability isn't unique to us either. Like many other traits we thought were exclusively human. Now, because we're so used to it, we don't think about it enough. But just imagine how fascinating the ability to use tools truly is. An animal being able to use a tool means it's intelligent enough to realize that it can overcome a barrier between itself and its goal by using something as seemingly unrelated as a stone or a stick. In other words, before even using the tool, the animal can mentally plan how to use it, how to manipulate it, and how to achieve its goal. This is a highly advanced cognitive ability, and it's not easy at all. In fact, it's questionable whether many humans around us can even do this. But look, using a tool is one thing. Creating a tool is an entirely different level, because simply using the shapes and structures found in nature to overcome obstacles in the wild isn't enough. To create, produce, or bring into existence something you know you need, or can at least imagine, but which doesn't yet exist in nature, is an entirely different dimension. Tool-making is practically a cognitive revolution. It's exactly this ability that made humans what they are and enabled civilization. Every piece of modern technology you use today, from cars to airplanes, rockets to televisions, the internet to smartphones, exists because of this. But it all became possible when we realized we could shape one stone by striking it with another to suit our needs. And this revolution began with what we all know as the Stone Age. Familiar from cartoons like the Flintstones, the Stone Age consists of 3 major and significant periods. The first is the Lower Paleolithic period, when tool-based human culture began, beginning around 2.5 to 3.5 million years ago, when the first members of the Homo genus appeared. This period roughly continued until the emergence and rise of Homo sapiens, about 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. For roughly 3 million years during this period, we were entirely hunter-gatherers. We hadn't yet discovered agriculture. Our existence depended on the wild animals, birds, and fish we could overcome with our tools, as well as the wild fruits, nuts, and plants we gathered by hand. It was during this period that we first learned to make tools by striking one stone against another. We noticed that when we struck 2 stones together at the right angle and speed, small, sharp fragments, called lithic flakes, or simply flakes, broke off from the softer stone, which we call the lithic core. Later, we realized we could use these flakes as knives, axe heads, and spear tips. Initially, by using smaller flakes, we developed what is now called the Oldowan tool culture. Subsequently, the Acheulean culture, based on larger flakes, evolved. In terms of culture and civilization, our ancestors living during that period weren't all that different from the orangutans or chimpanzees I mentioned earlier. As I mentioned earlier, Homo sapiens emerged around 300,000 years ago, diverging from their ancestor Homo heidelbergensis and separating from their closest cousins, the Neanderthals, marking the start of a period we call the Middle Paleolithic. This period continued until about 28,000 years ago. By this point, our tools had become more complex. Interestingly, however, the tools that dominated this period belonged primarily to Homo neanderthalensis, our Neanderthal cousins, rather than to us, Homo sapiens. During that period, Neanderthals, who were at least as dominant as we were, had developed a sophisticated cognitive capacity and culture, to the extent that they provided special care for their elderly and performed rituals for their dead. As part of this culture, the Mousterian tools that emerged had features suited to the Neanderthals' stronger grip strength and sharper points than those we could produce. During this period, Homo sapiens began to spread across the world, leaving Africa for the first time. For example, we reached the Australian continent during this time and also learned to truly master fire in this period. We began adorning our bodies with jewelry and paints and drawing cave paintings for the first time during this period. Most importantly, we learned true solidarity at this point. Of course, up until then, we and our ancestors had some form of social life, but we started to demonstrate cooperation in more challenging and complex conditions for the first time during this period. For example, during this period, we transitioned from hunting alone or in small groups to more coordinated hunting in larger groups. This taught us how to work together, build more complex social relationships, and adapt to the needs and desires of others. In other words, our modern culture began to truly take off at this point. Then came the Upper Paleolithic, lasting roughly until about 12,000 years ago. During this period, we became highly specialized in tool making. Our tools became increasingly diverse and complex. We grew even more skilled at accessing food. For example, we began producing darts, arrows propelled by blowing, underwater spears, fishing hooks, oil lamps, and ropes. In our cave paintings, we began using dots and lines for the first time to represent months based on the lunar cycle. We spread uncontrollably across all of Asia and Eurasia, and it was during this period that our closest cousins, the Neanderthals, went extinct. These conflicts between species and tribes, along with our expansion across vast geographies, also fostered the development of ethnic cultural identities, leading to the emergence of local cultural understandings rather than a single species sharing a unified culture. As a result, local variations in our tools began to emerge. After the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, which lasted about 1,300 years, followed, and then came the Iron Age. Our civilization, as you all know, has reached the present day. Today, we don't just use iron, but also steel, which is iron strengthened with carbon. We create entirely new materials. Beyond materials, we can even create new elements. But I want to draw your attention to this. Nearly the entire existence of the Homo genus and the roughly 14 human species we've discovered so far was spent in the Stone Age. Imagine. The Homo genus has existed for 2 to 3 million years, and the Stone Age lasted over 2.5 million years. So, don't be fooled by our ability to travel to space or cross continents by floating metal masses on water. Human history is almost entirely the history of the Stone Age. Can you imagine how exciting it is to see a similar transformation in non-human primate species? Here's an example. Capuchin monkeys in Brazil can typically crack hard-shelled fruits with stones, or use stones to dig up spiders hidden beneath the soil. As I mentioned earlier, we already knew this, but experts closely studying these animals observed that capuchins sometimes strike stones together to break them, and then lick the fragments of the broken stones. This is a strange behavior in itself, and we don't yet know exactly why they do it. They're likely consuming minerals accumulated in the broken stones. But when researchers looked at the lithic flakes scattered from the stones they broke to lick the dust, they noticed something very peculiar. These flakes were almost identical in quality to those produced by humans, and it appears that these capuchins didn't start making these tools just a few years ago. They've been producing them for hundreds, even thousands of years. They haven't yet been observed using these flakes as weapons, but they might be doing so. And we might have completely overlooked it. In other words, a revolutionary discovery like this might be waiting for the next Jane Goodall. Yes, I'm talking to you. Setting capuchins aside, we already know that some primates can use tools in ways different from their most obvious or initial purposes. For example, bonobos, which we believe are even closer to us than chimpanzees, no longer use thick sticks solely for digging into termite mounds. They also use them as levers to move stones and nests that would otherwise be difficult to lift. Additionally, bonobos can use sharp stones to strike bones and access bone marrow. They can also craft spears from tree branches, using them as weapons or barriers. According to primatologists, the methods used by bonobos resemble those of Homo sapiens who produced the Oldowan culture during the Lower Paleolithic. Not only that, but bonobos living alongside humans can even exhibit behaviors like starting a barbecue. We even know that chimpanzees prefer cooked meat over raw meat. Moreover, orangutans observing humans have been seen exhibiting advanced behaviors like washing clothes and sheets. These are just a few examples of advanced tool use. All these observations over the last 12 to 13 years have given rise to a field called primate archaeology, and, subsequently, the claim that these species have entered the Stone Age today. Still, there are a few important points to keep in mind when making this claim. First, just because humans passed through the Stone Age to reach where we are today, when we say that other species using or even making stone tools are in the Stone Age, we're implying that there's only one possible path for biological or cultural evolution to produce a complex organism capable of building civilizations like humans. In other words, we're implying that other primates are on the path to becoming human, or even that they must be. This is actually a question often asked by people who don't fully understand evolution. If humans evolved from monkeys, why aren't other monkeys becoming human? In reality, evolution has no goal or purpose like becoming human. The lineage that led to humans produced us due to a series of chance events. For a completely different species to go through the exact same genetic and environmental changes is impossible due to the chaotic nature of the environment and genetics. Of course, similar traits can evolve under similar conditions. There's no rule that an animal using stone tools will necessarily progress to a Bronze Age or Iron Age like humans. Perhaps they'll build an entirely different culture and establish a civilization on a completely different foundation. Therefore, we need to completely abandon the idea that the purpose of evolution was to create humans. All species currently alive are, by virtue of their survival, evolutionarily as successful as we are. The second question is, why don't new life forms emerge from a chemical soup today? Currently existing life, especially microbial life, has occupied every niche where life could potentially start anew. As a result, even if some chemical molecules begin a path toward biochemical complexity in surface freshwater or around hydrothermal vents at the ocean floor, they cannot progress beyond becoming food for the already present life forms around them. For this reason, life cannot start again from scratch. The same applies to other primate cultures. Since humans currently dominate all habitats, the likelihood of new cultures or hominid species evolving is virtually non-existent. Therefore, even if monkeys are in the Stone Age, this doesn't mean they can build human-like cultures. Thirdly, academic studies yield conflicting results regarding monkeys' abilities to make stone tools. For example, in one study, researchers provided chimpanzees with all the materials needed to make stone tools, yet observed that the chimpanzees were unable to combine them to produce meaningful tools. The researchers even kept them hungry for a while and placed their favorite foods behind obstacles that could only be overcome using stone tools, creating incentives. Despite this, the chimpanzees couldn't produce even a simple tool to reach the desired food. But as soon as a human was introduced to the environment to demonstrate how to make the tool, the chimpanzees were able to learn tool making by observing the human. They even managed to teach it to other chimpanzees. In other words, if there's a spark to ignite the fire of civilization in non-human primates, that spark might currently be humans themselves. As you can see, it's exciting to think that non-human primates have entered the Stone Age, but it's not entirely clear what such a hypothesis is useful for. Of course, if monkeys are on the path to building advanced cultures, it's important for us to recognize this early. After all, in our archaeological research into human history, when examining areas where we coexisted with animals like capuchins or chimpanzees, we need to consider that some of the tools we discover might have been made by non-human primates. But beyond that, whether other primates have entered the Stone Age or not doesn't make much difference to me. After all, we won't understand what it truly means now, but only when we look back a few 100,000 years from now. The key point is to understand that we are not the only species with culture. And this raises a single question. As the dominant species now, will we provide these other cultures with the living space that nature once granted us? The answer to this question will determine what this blue planet will look like in the future. Until the next video, take care.